What's growing on, gardeners? It's Saturday, February 10th, and if you believe that groundhog, winter is slowly coming to an end here on the southeastern coast of North Carolina. Have you ever wanted to plant a thriving food forest that will give you fresh harvests all year round in your backyard, but you thought, I just don't have a backyard large enough to do that? Well, I'm here to tell you, you can. And on today's video, I'm going to show you how I planted a food forest all around my backyard, and it's so small, so hidden, you wouldn't even know it's there. Anyone of any backyard size can do what I did.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell to receive new video notifications, and check out our Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom designed apparel and other gear. Your support is greatly appreciated.
I knew when I moved into this property that I wanted to have a thriving food forest, but I also knew that this is just a standard quarter-acre residential plot, and this was not meant to be my forever home. So for that reason, I didn't want every single bit of space to be taken up by trees, and I also wanted to leave a large, wide open area for Dale to run around in as well to enjoy his free space. So I knew that when it came to planting out my yard and garden, I needed to fill things in a secret way, to have a secret food forest that no one would see but me. While my entire home plot is about 1/4 of an acre, that's not what I'm growing my food forest on. I'm growing 40 fruit trees in my backyard right now on 0.02 acres. That's all. That's all the space you need. When you add up all of the rows that my fruit trees are growing in, they are 240 feet long by 4 feet wide, or 960 square feet overall, for a grand total of 0.022 acres. And this is how I do it. I am simply using space efficiency to my advantage. I'm planting everything along my fence line. So here I have bananas, and then that moves into my fig trees that you see right here. After the fig tree, you will find an Asian persimmon tree, more bananas, and then you will find more perimeter plantings of fig trees. Where the fig trees end, you will see 2 grapes. One is mature and one is just getting growing, and then an olive tree. And in the rear property, you will see some dwarf citrus trees, followed by a blank space that I have available for more citrus trees. Then you will find a dwarf peach tree, a couple of pawpaws, another Asian persimmon tree, a 3-in-1 grafted Asian pear that I grafted myself, a peach tree that I cut down that I will replace, and a bunch of apple trees over there. And then up against the house, I have my most mature cold-sensitive fruit trees, my Owari Satsuma, my Lila Avocado, and my Meyer Lemon. And when I say 40 fruit trees, I only mean the fruit trees I have in ground. That does not include all of my potted fruit trees. So using this style of planting, I was able to easily fit all of these trees around my yard. Now, this is not a typical food forest design. This is more like edible landscaping. But these plants, they're becoming mature, and for many reasons, they're already self-sustaining. And I was able to fit those 40 fruit trees and still leave my entire yard open. The yard looks huge on this panning shot right here. Trust me, it's not this big in real life. The camera makes it look larger. But the fact is, I have 40 fruit trees growing, and you really don't even know they're there. Here is how I did it. I'm growing all, for the most part, dwarf and semi-dwarf fruit trees, and I prune them annually. And when you annually prune fruit trees that are relatively small, you can space them pretty closely together and pretty close to your fence. I plant everything about 30 inches off the face of my fence, and then I space my fruit trees typically 6 feet apart. So I have 40 fruit trees averaging 6-foot spacing. That's my 240 feet of rows that I have occupied overall. Now, what I did was, I knew it would take me several years to build all of these out, because buying dozens and dozens of fruit trees is expensive and it takes time to plant. So what I did was, I borrowed my neighbor's tiller way back when I moved into this plot, and I went around the entire yard with the tiller in preparation that I was going to plant my food forest hidden along the fence. So I've actually had this piece of weed barrier sitting here for about 3 years now. I've been slowly planting out the perimeter as time allows me. So here is what the old weed barrier looks like before I rip it up. It is pretty old at this point. It's been sitting here for quite a while, and there's a lot of weed penetration where I have the garden staples down. So now I'm actually going to go ahead and I am going to rip off this weed barrier and I'm going to expand my food forest. I've ordered close to a dozen fruit trees this year and they are all going to go in this empty space. All of the old weed barrier has been removed and you can see the relatively pristine soil underneath. 3 years and there are basically no weeds or anything like that. Everything looks great. Now what I have done is I have pulled a string line that is 48 inches off the back of my fence because I'm going to perfectly cut out these beds, and that's what I have right here with this manual edger. And then you'll also notice that I have these pieces of wood. I have these 30 inches off the back of my fence right here because this is where I'm going to place each of my individual fruit trees. So you can see the string line, you can see where the fruit trees are going. Now I just need to clean up this bed right here so everything is in ship shape for planting. Well, after several hours of digging and edging and placing some border brick, I finally have a bed that is ready to plant in, and I'm really excited to show you. Now keep in mind it's about 20 degrees warmer today than it was when I started yesterday evening, so it's been quite a bit of work, but boy is it rewarding, and I can't wait to show you what it looks like now. One of the things that I like doing is I put these border bricks as edging around all of my plants where I plant these edible landscaping fruit trees, and that is to allow me to plant all of the trees high relative to the ground itself. And I also have centipede grass here in the south, which is rhizomous, and it creeps and crawls and takes over an area. So I really need some kind of break. Now this is totally optional, and if you don't have a lawn like I do, you may not need to do this, but I just wanted to show you it is pretty important to have a border if you want to plant your fruit trees raised and if you have invasive weeds and lawns and things like that. So you'll see I have everything sloping down and nice and even and cut out. I did this all with a manual edger, and all you really need to do is measure off the face of your fence and then pull a string line, make sure it is nice and tight, and that will give you a perfectly straight line to edge against. So it's really easy for an amateur. Now I'll show you what I have growing on here. The first tree I'm going to plant is a semi-dwarf, self-fertile, all-in-one almond tree. And you see it's a bare root tree. It is completely dormant. It came from Portland, Oregon, so it's a lot colder there than it is here right now. So what we want to do is we want to let it soak in a bucket of water for about an hour before we plant it. And that stake right there that says almond on it delineates where I'm going to plant the tree. Then I have lots of other trees delineated by stakes. They haven't all come in yet because I placed lots of orders from different online mail order nurseries, but you'll see this is going to be a persimmon. This right here is going to be a jujube or a jujube, however you want to say it. Then we're going to have another persimmon here, and then I have a pluot in blue, a pluery in pink back there, and I want to plant an avocado in the rear if I'm able to get the one that I want. So it's really important that you have everything planned out in advance. It will make your life a whole lot easier, and I recommend doing this while it's nice and cool out. Don't wait until it's a really warm day like today, or it's a lot more work. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to spacing my fruit trees apart from each other, I usually go anywhere from 6 feet to 8 feet, depending on the fruit tree. And that's because I buy all dwarf and semi-dwarf varieties, and I prune them annually. If you're not going to prune them annually, and by the way, you should, it increases fruiting when you do it properly. But if you're not going to prune them annually, or you're going to grow seed-grown fruit trees, or grow them on standard rootstock, you're going to need a lot more space. I generally think those practices and principles don't work well for backyard gardening. Make sure you prune them annually and get them on small rootstocks that keep them small permanently. So these stakes have been placed to give me that 6 to 8 foot spacing. There is a small exception right here. Because I'm growing an almond tree next to an olive tree, these will probably be 2 of the larger trees in my yard. So I gave them an extra foot. They have 9 foot spacing right here because I think these trees are just going to need a little bit more room to spread, but the rest of the trees we're going to maintain that 6 to 8 foot spacing. Off the back of the fence, I have 30 inches of clearance. That has worked great for me for many years. I always keep the backs of the trees pruned, so it's not going to be a big problem. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start digging the hole for this fruit tree, and I like using a square shovel for that. More on that later. Okay, now we have our fruit tree placed in the planting hole exactly where we want it to be. And the first thing that you'll notice is I dug a square hole. And the reason why I did this is because there's an old tale that says if you have hard soil and you dig a round hole and place a brand new young fruit tree in there, the weak roots will spiral around the hard soil and become root bound almost like they would inside a nursery container. Now, some say that is absolute nonsense, that doesn't happen, but some say it does to a degree. So when digging a planting hole, whether it's true or whether it's fiction, you may as well just plant a square hole anyway, just in case, in the off chance that it is true. Now here I have very sandy soil, so it's pretty easy digging as long as there are no tree roots in there. So if you have harder soil to dig through, you can use a digging shovel and then use the square shovel in order to just square up the edges. Now the next thing you'll notice is I dug this planting hole twice as big as it needs to be and also quite a bit deeper. And that's because these weak roots, I want them to grab hold easily in pure native soil as quickly as possible. Now, I did not backfill this with any other kind of foreign soil. We want our trees to acclimate in native soil, but because these roots are young, I did chop up the bottom of the planting hole as much as I could. That way it'll be nice and loamy for the roots to grab hold more easily. So that's why you want to dig your planting hole larger than need be and also much deeper, and then just fill it in order to give your roots really easy soil to grow through. And the final thing I did was, you'll see that I put a mound of soil at the bottom of the hole. It almost looks like a pyramid, and I did that because I want to drape these bare roots, almost like you want to drape a broom, nice and even, so none of the roots are kind of entangling each other. Try to spread them out. And now that they are spread out and exactly where they want to be, I want to show you what the tree looks like from the top. The next thing you'll notice is this is a grafted fruit tree. Here you can see the rootstock, and then the rootstock has been headed, it has been cut off right here, and the scion wood, which is the all-in-one variety of almond, has been grafted onto it. Now, it's very important that I plant grafted fruit trees because they will fruit within about a year or two. When you grow a fruit tree from seed, they, just like human beings, take 10 to 15 years to become sexually mature enough to reproduce. So if you were growing your fruit trees from seed, not only is it going to take forever for them to fruit, but you may not get a known variety. You may get something cross-pollinated and you'll get a random tree. When you buy a grafted tree, you have seed-grown rootstock, and then you take a cutting of wood from a sexually mature mother tree of a known variety, and you graft it onto the tree. So you are basically getting a tree that is cloned from the mother. You know exactly the type of fruit it is going to produce, and because you're using sexually mature wood as the scion right here, the tree thinks it's as old as the mother tree. So this tree, which is really only a year or two old, probably thinks it's more like 15 to 20 years old, and it will be ready to fruit immediately. So it is very important that we do not bury this graft. The rootstock has to be exposed above the soil, and then the graft needs to be exposed well above that. Because if you were to bury this graft could actually wind up rooting in the soil and air layering itself, and then the tree will be growing on its own roots, which is not something you really want, because the rootstock is specifically selected to be well adapted to different soil types, to be disease resistant, and also to control the size. So if you let this scion wood root on its own, then you run the risk of it not being well adapted to your soil. You may have more disease issues, and you may get a random sized tree. It may grow with less vigor, or it may grow with so much vigor it could take over your yard. And you will also notice that I have a piece of PVC pipe that I placed in front of the planting hole. And the reason why I did this was I wanted to see what the final grade of this piece of ground and that piece of ground is, to make sure that my roots are slightly protruding over that. And that's for two reasons. Number one, when I compact this fruit tree, the roots are going to get pushed deeper into the ground, and I don't want them buried too much. And number two, I want these surface roots to just lightly be exposed on the top of the soil, because I find if you have some of the surface roots just sitting on top of the soil and then cover them in compost, they will root much more quickly and send surface roots everywhere, and I get my fruit trees to take off much more quickly this way. So I always plant my fruit trees about an inch or two high, and then pile some compost around those roots to protect them. Now, before I backfill this planting hole, I want to amend it with organic fertilizers, and I'm going to use specifically an all-purpose organic fertilizer like this Espoma Plant Tone, which is a 533 NPK, but any roughly 555 NPK organic fertilizer will work well. Then I'm going to dust the roots with bone meal, which is an organic source of phosphorus and calcium. It's very good for helping root development of young plants. Now, because this is a bare root fruit tree, it is still in total dormancy, so we do not want to hit it with any liquid fertilizers that are going to immediately be available to the tree. We want to use only these organic fertilizers because they will take weeks, if not a month or more, to break down, especially in relatively cold soil, because they have to be consumed by the bacteria and the fungi in the soil and be decomposed in order for those nutrients to break down. So when we add them to our trees, just like this, it's not going to burn the roots because they're not immediately bioavailable as fertilizers. They're actually precursors to fertilizers in the raw form. So I'm just going to take a small handful of both the bone meal and the organic fertilizer. Then I'm going to backfill the roots halfway. And now that the fruit tree has been backfilled halfway, I'm going to go in with one more handful of the organic fertilizer and the organic bone meal. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pool the native soil over the fruit tree. Now that we've backfilled the fruit tree with all of the native soil, we have to compact around it. And to do this, I'm going to hold the fruit tree and lightly step on all of the soil around it because I want to push the soil down, but I don't want the fruit tree to go any deeper. So we're just going to use our body weight, not press hard, and just do that in sort of like a ring around the fruit tree until I feel that the soil is adequately compressed. So that feels really good. And now in that light compression ring that I just made, I'm going to pour half of the 5-gallon bucket full of water that I used to soak the fruit tree in, and that is going to further help the soil compact. Okay, now that the water has absorbed into the ground, it is time to place our compost layer around the base of the tree. And remember, I specifically left these roots of the tree exposed above soil because I want them to surface root in the compost layer. And I'm going to use an organic mushroom compost here, but you can use any kind of good quality compost, whether it's manure-based, mushroom compost, homemade compost, it's all fine. We're going to dump this bag around the tree, and then we are going to spread the compost around so it covers up those surface roots, but we don't want a pile of compost resting up against the trunk of the tree. If you do that, if you mound it around like this, that is called a mulch volcano. That is a no-go. The decomposing compost or decomposing mulch can actually assist in trunk rot of the tree, especially when the tree is young and not well established. So what we want to do is we want to just take that compost and layer it in about a 2-inch thick layer around where the roots of the tree will be. And then we want to take a little bit more of that water and water in the general area. And remember, this is just plain water. There's no fertilizer in this water at all. Now, the last thing that we're going to do is we are going to tie our fruit tree up to a stake. And this is very, very important to do because it is going to take about 2 years for these roots to grow large enough and grab well enough hold into the soil to truly anchor the tree. So this tree is going to begin flushing out buds and developing leaves within the next 6 to 8 weeks or so. And when that happens, it's going to become like a wind sail. All of those leaves are going to grab onto the wind. So it's going to become very prone to being blown over with gusty breezes and ripped right out of the ground. That is why you must anchor new fruit trees. Now, I specifically decided that I was going to bury this stake into the ground before I planted the fruit tree. That way I wouldn't drive a stake through the roots that I just put down into the ground. So putting the stake in before I put down the tree, that means that my fruit tree will never be harmed by driving the stake. And I'm going to use one of these 1/2-inch pieces of vinyl tape in order to tie down the fruit tree because this vinyl tape expands expands along with the trunk of the tree. If you used a fixed tape that doesn't expand, then that could cut into and girdle the tree. These vinyl expanding tapes will not do that. So I'm simply going to wrap that around the trunk of the tree and then tie it to this stake in at least 2 different areas. That way, when we invariably get severe weather in the spring and we get some gusty thunderstorms that blow in when things start warming up consistently, this tree will not go anywhere. Then we will give our fruit tree an eyeballing, make sure it is very straight and level to the eye, which it appears to be. Look at that. All of my fruit trees, they form in almost a perfect line when I go like this. That is accuracy. When you plant them all 30 inches off the back of the fence, they kind of blend into one for a neat, orderly install. One thing you may notice is that I did not mulch around the base of my fruit tree. That's because I'm going to mulch all of the fruit trees when I eventually get them all into the ground. So because it's still early February and it's not really getting very warm, the trees will be just fine without a mulch layer. But once I get them all planted in the ground, I will make sure to extend my natural mulch layer all the way up to the water barrels where the citrus is, and you'll see everything interconnected at the end. So this will be a fully mulched area once I have every single fruit tree planted. So if you think that your backyard is not large enough to plant a thriving food forest, I'm sorry, that's just not true. With a little bit of planning and a space-efficient design, it is shocking what you could fit in a very small corner of your yard. Again, I'm only growing on 0.02 acres when you add up all of the real estate in these perimeter beds around my yard. Look, here's the fruit tree that I just planted. That's the almond tree. And you can see how awesome everything is going to turn out once all of these new fruit trees are installed. They are en route. They're starting to ship. So I'm going to have a mass planting over the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned so you can see how this project evolves. And when this is all said and done, I will have over 60 fruit trees planted around the perimeter of my yard along the fence line alone. 60 fruit trees that nobody even knows they're there because they're planted in a space-efficient way around the fence, so they're basically using no space at all. Could I have simply taken those 60 fruit trees and just planted them out in the open in my yard and had a more traditional food forest design? Yes, absolutely. But like I said, I don't think this is going to be my forever home. I have future plans to have a real homestead property with real acreage where I can have a true food forest design like that. For a standard residential suburban property like I have, this is perfect because I get all of the diversity that you'd find in a food forest that will feed me almost every month throughout the year, but I still have a big, wide open area. And that will pay dividends when the eventual time comes that I feel that I want to move on to a larger property. Because what I will have is, I will have a yard and garden full of food security for anybody that would want to purchase this land, but also it's still wide open. So if you want to have a lawn, if you want to have a space to play with your kids and throw the football or the baseball around, if you want to have a big wide open area for your dog to run around like I want to have, I still have all of that. So I'm able to have everything I want in terms of a food forest and lots of fruit trees and food security, but I still get the wide open space that I would have in a pretty traditional suburban plot of land. And that right there is how you can build a prolific food forest to provide food almost all year round in even small backyards. And in my opinion, this is a pretty no compromise design where you can still have the wide open spaces, but have a lot of things planted around your yard and garden for you to eat off throughout most of the year without really anyone else being the wiser. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. Like I said, I have a lot more fruit trees coming, and I really want you to see how this project evolves as the spring progresses. If you're curious about any of the products that I featured in this video, like the fertilizers or any kind of planting supplies, or anything else I use in real life in my garden, I have them all linked down below in the video description in my Amazon storefront. So expand that video description, click on the Amazon storefront link, and you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're there, check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video.
I'm gonna get that ball. I'm gonna get it. Oh, he's playing keep away. Oh, I'm gonna get the ball. Dale, I'm gonna get that ball. Dale, what's over there? Oh! Oh, ha, ha, I got it now. You have grass on your snoot. You're so vicious. Hey, buddy, can you drop? Drop it. Good boy. And go, Dale.